This is an answer to a few questions pertaining to the role of evidence seeking in regards to the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, where sometimes with some individuals questions come up, and questions are very important to investigate, to look at. Why is something accepted? Why is this thing so? If this is so, then what caused it? So there is a legitimacy, at least the intention behind using questions, formulating questions and asking questions. And I think there was another question about devas, right? Okay. Again, having to do with evidence, what are are there any evidences, especially in terms of rebirth and what people mistakenly use as reincarnation, even while referring to Buddhism, which it doesn't have that. At least the earliest teachings of the Buddha, this doesn't address the later developments that came up, over 1,000 years or so, if not more, after the Buddha's death, where, people went the wrong way, misinterpreting things and the teachings, etc. So those were primarily the questions, and other, including psychic phenomena such as the abhinyas or the iddhis, the powers, supernormal abilities, things like that, pertaining to are there any evidence? Okay. There are questions that must be asked, and there are questions that should not even be looked at, addressed. This does not land well for many people who are run by conceit. Most of us are run by conceit. Conceit needs ignorance to function. And it's one of the best tools to stay in limbo. When I was in academia, when I was a professor, prior to that I was a teacher in secondary school and primary school, I would see the reliance on scholarly, rigorous research, etc., especially in the arena of academia and scholarly work, etc. And then I would look at their characters, the individuals. To me, it has always been interesting to look at the human element in the interactions I was having with the person, whether in person or hear about them and then go and meet them, try my best to go and meet them if I could, if they were alive, interact with them to see them. As to the things that they're talking about, writing about, how well have these things seeped into their behavior, whether it's poetry, whether it's lofty ideals, things, beautiful things that inspire, or at least that have inspired me. And then I would go and speak with them if they were my professors when I was still a research student, and then I would be, in many cases, surprised. Because despite the person having at least one PhD or doctorate, they were not such a joy to be around. Or they lacked integrity. personal integrity. I would not want to have that person as my friend. Basically, that would be a conclusion I would see in many cases. I'm not saying all of them because that would be, completely generalizing. But based on my experiences with actual individuals. So that raised a few questions for me. Because obviously I was seeing the evidence of a person, given the fact that these individuals have gained much honor and respect academically, but they really suffered tremendously when it came to human relations. Many of them, were terrible at it. Or they lacked morality. Principles of virtue were lacking. If I was caught in a difficult situation, I would not necessarily find them coming in to rescue me, for example. Something that you would do to just anybody on the street, you see them, or especially people that you know and value their importance in your life. So that made me think, that made me consider, especially when I was a science teacher for over a decade, and I would see the scientific method being used, paraded around as the golden standard. To this day, politicians use that as their, running campaign theme in a sense. They use scientific, these terms like the one I mentioned, rigorous research, robust, etc. All these big words, like you see them also on resumes. People look for words, heavy, strong, powerful words to put in the resume to impress the reader, to get you that interview. So similarly, people use these words when it comes to evidence-based. That's another thing. When I was studying to be a psychotherapist, where I left everything and went back to school, left my career as a professor and went back to schools because I was enjoying helping students after hours. I said, okay, I'm enjoying that more than conveying these pieces of information to people. That might change, that might not, but at least relationally I could do something. That's when I left everything and went back to school to get my other degrees, and this time in psychology, family therapy, and then worked thousands and thousands of hours to gain the hours in practicum, in the internships, and then in actual private practice, my own practice as a clinician. So I would see also individuals who would come in through the door having those things that people on the street are dying to get, such as perhaps the physicality, the look, the attractiveness, physical appeal, wealth. I've had individuals who would come in, patients who would come in, and they would be, all the boxes would be checked as far as materially, physically, socially even, having come from the right pedigree, right families, right, quote unquote, right? What we consider as right, the right stuff. And these people were miserable. So just like earlier, years earlier, I was kind of surprised when confronting individuals, very top echelon society members, such as, I was referring to the professors and people with countless articles scientific articles or scholarly work in journals and this and that, or very famous universities where they've taught, they had tenureship, etc. And I would sit down with them and I was like, wow, this person is lacking so much. But they're full of other stuff. Yeah, what? They have information. And if you ask them, everything they say, it has to be perfectly matching some type of a, what they consider to be evidence-based or peer-reviewed. That's the other thing. So we have to really then question these standards that we have come up with that have nothing to do with the gaining of knowledge and understanding. This is where the Dhamma, Buddhism as such, Buddhism, let's narrow it down to what we mean. The earliest teachings of the Buddha, the teachings we get as the Dhamma, as taught based on the earliest teachings of the Buddha. Okay? And specifically I'm referring to the Pali Canon. Undiluted, unmixed by other stuff that came, even calling themselves Buddhist. Mahayana, Vajrayana, other theories that keep popping up, as well as modern language, modern lingo and terms and phrases that are being included even within Dhamma talks to make it more palatable, acceptable to the masses, to sell Dhamma. See, to sell, blatantly stated, an idea, a thing, a product, you have to use convincing language, such as peer-reviewed, evidence-based. Could you give me conclusive evidence? Well, we know how far that goes even in court systems. Today, you even have images of the crime being committed, and people could come in and they can argue. I was stunned when lawyers mentioned to me that, and even I read it also, books written by lawyers, attorneys, judges, people who you would consider have very solid critical thinking abilities, stating that the legal system, justice, in fact, has nothing to do with legal system. The legal system has nothing to do with the truth, essentially. That's what they said, not just essentially, but verbatim. What does that mean in regards to a crime being committed? That means the whole legal system, what attorneys do, is based on rhetoric. How well can you win an argument? You ask any attorney out there in the world, they will nod in agreement, affirmatively, as that being it. So evidence as such that is accepted, it's up in the air as to how it's delivered. I remember in the O.J. Simpson trial cases, like it went on forever in the 90s. The evidence is there. They're pointing at it. It's blood-drenched, weapons, this and that, gloves. But how they went around, played with the emotions, played with so-called rhetoric and arguing strategies, playing around, manipulating the mind. Of course, before you manipulate someone else's mind, you have to have already manipulated yours, which the Buddha had a term for. Wrong view. Micchaditthi. Micchaditthi is at the crux, at the core of these new terminologies that we have infused to make us sound like we are more credible. We're coming from a good place. Like empiricism is another thing that scientists have used. Most scientists today do not use the scientific method, even though they claim they are, which is very, it was slid from under the door, this whole idea of peer-reviewed. And when you look at, what if your peers are dumb? What if your peers have nothing to do with the research going on, with the level of your kind of research that you're doing, that, let's say, it's on the fringes. And science always comes out of the fringes. It's discovered by those who are considered rebels because they break the mold. They are risking everything to go ahead and look into the farthest reaches of other people's closed up thinking cannot deliver. So they go ahead. They have to leave everything behind. So you jump out of the plane with a parachute, yes, but your parachute is not attached, or you're not attached to the seatbelt. Because even with a parachute, you cannot go ahead and experience free fall at 14,000 feet. It's an experience I've had myself as a layman. But you have to leave everything you know behind. So to intentionally, it might have been a good, there might have been a good intention behind using this whole peer review thing, but it also is the best way to dumb down and to control what it is that you're about to say. To control, others are controlling you, including, this is where it becomes dangerous. When we say, I have to accept this, I will accept this rather, but once I have seen all these results, I have seen the proof, I have seen the evidence. Well, fortunately for us, in the suttas we have several examples where individuals would come and ask the Buddha, such as Mollyapagguna, a monk who came in, and the Buddha is explaining something. He's explaining principles of paticca-samuppada, dependent causation, the principles, the 12 links of causal relations, basically, which talks about conditionality. Because of this, these things ensue. As caused by this, these factors, this ensues, this happens. So Mollyapagguna comes in and says, yes, Bhante, but who is it that's touching? So, for example, the Buddha is saying, because of having, for example, the six sense spaces, salayatana, there is contact. So Mollyapagguna would jump in and says, Bhante, what is, or rather, who is the toucher? And this goes on with almost every single link of the dependent arising principles, paticca-samuppada. And every single time, the Buddha says, Nakallopanho, pagguna, nakallopanho. That is not an appropriate question to be asking. In other words, he was much nicer than I am, of course. I would say, that's a stupid question. Probably that's what he said, because you'd be surprised at the level of patience demonstrated by the Buddha. We've done this sutta, I've translated it, and we've also done it in one of the sutta exploration series with the students. So I forgot which week it was, but it's the Mollyapagguna from the Samyutta Nikaya. I don't remember the number now off the top of my head, but another one is Malunkyaputta, who one day gets frustrated and comes to the Buddha and says, Bhante, I'm going to leave. I'm going to disrobe. Why? He says, the Buddha, what happened? He says, Bhante, I want to know these things. I heard many things about you, and I was hoping that you would be the one who would give me the answers. What answers? Well, there's the 10 questions that were, to this day, people are still stuck on it, that tells you about the stupidity of humans. In India at the time, which happened to be one of the quote-unquote smartest places on the planet, because you had some top-notch philosophers, nevertheless drenched in wrong view. Okay? So, because they kept on fluctuating back and forth between eternalist view and the nihilistic view, what today you can roughly say the creationist, for example, or and the atheist, for example. That would be, equivalents of those days. But there's nothing new today we have. So they wanted to have evidence. So Malunkyaputta comes and says, unless you give me the answers to these 10 questions, Basically, one is, where do we come from? Where are we going? Specifically, I need concrete evidence. Where does specifically, he was asking about the Tathagata, the Buddha. Okay, where does the Buddha go when he dies? Okay, I need to know that. Does he not go somewhere? Does he go? Does he go and not go? Things like that. Is there an end to the universe? What was the beginning of the universe? All these questions that people, it's stunning the level of ignorance that we have when there is no wisdom to ask, why am I asking this question? How is this question going to help me? And that's exactly what the Buddha says to Malankiputta. First he asks him, challenges him by saying, have I ever told you that, hey, come here, ordain, be a monk, and I will tell you these answers? He says, no, Bhante. He says, oh, okay, so I never put that condition. Yes, you didn't put, okay. And he says, he also was complaining that the Buddha is not demonstrating his psychic abilities. So he says, did I tell you? Did I promise you? Hey, become a monk and I will be jumping around like Cirque du Soleil in front of you and flying without the ropes, this and that, and do all these magical tricks like David Blaine or some other genius out there, trying to look like they are breaking the laws of physics so that you can be impressed. Ooh, so you are going to be my teacher? Yes, let me bow down to you. We still have this today. We have Malunkyaputtas of today, but what they're using are not talking necessarily asking questions about those 10 questions, for example, or asking about, they're asking for so-called conclusive evidence. That is their language today. But essentially it's the same old. The person is stuck in their conceit, in their ignorance, and their fear. Fear and attachment to the idea of a self, Sakkaya Ditthi. Personality view, this is so deep in us. So we come up with all these brushstrokes of, oh, I'm very intelligent, just like those professors or people who come up with conclusions such as, if you have this, X, Y, Z, then this will happen. That's essentially what people say when they use the scientific method, which is, unfortunately, the Cartesian way of thinking, which has ruined the minds and entire generations, not just of the West. You have the same in Asia, that are trying so hard to mimic. You have the same in China, in India, powerful. With the level of intelligence, knowledge-based and entrepreneurship and all that. So they are vying for the same methodologies to take whatever the Western philosophies, etc., schools of thinking, including science, have brought forth and try to utilize, to embody it, and then to enhance over it. And they've done an excellent job in many fields, but the problem is to trust the philosophies, ruinous philosophies of René Descartes, for example, who says, I think, therefore I am. Some of the stupidest statements ever made by any human being. So you exist because you think, is that it? What about the other person over there who has Alzheimer's? They don't exist? Is that it? Even a 4-year-old could demolish his whole thesis that today we worship. And we use that to maintain the status quo of stupidity, of ignorance in the fields of science, academia, etc. I have to see the evidence. Well, in various suttas, some of which I've covered, but you have, for example, Venerable Sariputta pointing out, he was not the only one, not just one incident, one situation, but he pinpoints in one particular sutta how you have the eye, you have the object, visible object. Even if you have a perfectly functioning eye, you have a visible object in front of you that's not blocked by something, right? And even the eye is turned towards that object. But there's still not vision taking place. There's no eye consciousness taking place. People they think automatically, if you have an eye and you have a visible object, and the conditions are right, meaning it's not in absolute pitch blackness, and the eye works, and the eyelids are open. So you have to be specific with these people. Because they're like lawyers, they're looking for, this the precedent of this, or was there a precedent of the, how was about this, they're always sneakily trying to convince away life, blindfolding themselves of life, using these fancy terms of, was there enough evidence for this or against this? Meanwhile, life is going underneath their feet, and they're dying moment to moment. And Venerable Sariputta says, even with those conditions, it's not enough for there to be I consciousness, because he introduces the importance of attention. Unless there is attention targeting the object by the person who has the eye, the internal base, looking at the external base, meaning the visible form, in those right circumstances, set of circumstances, with attention. Unless there is attention, then it won't happen. So if there is attention, then there will be I consciousness taking place. So similarly, you can present a person with tons and tons of evidence. If their attention is placed on the wrong thing, which Malunkyaputtas was, as well as today's science, the evidence is so great. People have such arrogance, so-called astronomers or cosmologists or whatever, that go ahead still hold on to their guns, as they say, and say, no, there cannot be any intelligent life anywhere outside of what we see. Well, the science that we use, the physics that we use, still is very backward. Okay? There's enough evidence. Just in my lifetime, I have seen evidence, I have seen research done, but then it just gets shut down, like, gravitics, zero-point energy, the ability to use certain abilities such as remote viewing that is known. People use it, and you don't have to be so-called psychic to do that. There's experiments that you could do, but then this is how silly we have become. Silly, because of, again, that usage of the Cartesian way of thinking. Hey, what's the proof of this? Let me look at scientific journals or Nature magazine. Let me look at, which is a scientific, very prestigious publication. What is the scientific community saying about this? Meanwhile, you're completely negating this thing that is happening. Meanwhile, the government, of course, takes note of this, and it's all published. It's fortunately published online, but people refuse to see it. Just like the evidence at court, people refuse to see it because they're too mesmerized by what the jury, what the others are expecting to see and feel about this situation. The evidence is not that important. So Malunkyaputta was one of those. Molliyapaguna was one of those. We have many of them among us. We probably are such individuals. And Lord Buddha goes ahead and explains, gives him a metaphor, a beautiful metaphor. He says, Malunkyaputta, you are just like that person who gets shot in the middle of a city, in the middle of a courtyard, in a village, in a town, shot by a poisonous arrow. And he's in pain, he drops down, and people come in, rush in, his friends and family, a doctor comes in, imagine that. And the doctor says, this is very poisonous, we have to remove it immediately. And Malunkyaputta grabs the hand of the doctor, stops him from operating, and he says, no, one touch, Nobody touches this arrow because I need to first know who is the man, who's the person who shot me with it. Okay? This is not ridiculous. This is Cartesian method, by the way. Okay? I have to see the evidence of it, even though if it's looking at me smack dab in the face. You will not see it, even if it's looking at you, in front of you. When others see it, but you will not see it unless you relinquish the seatbelt and jump out of the plane into reality, into experiencing life. We all do this in some areas of our lives, of course, but in others, we are very agenda-keeping, very, we have our ulterior motives. We are trying so hard to prove something otherwise, or disprove it, basically. And you had countless individuals like that in the suttas, where individuals came in, people came in to try to trap. You have this in the Nigantanatha Buddha's tricks, the Jains leader, Mahavir, in India. To this day, I've actually had that. 15 years ago, I met a person, a Jain person, who was still trying to convince me that Buddhism is an offshoot of Jainism, which was like, have you studied your own religion, man? What are you talking about? Do you know? Because they've adopted a lot of Buddhist principles. And then they go ahead and attack Buddhism by saying, well, it doesn't match this because they're still promoting ignorance, wrong view, by using certain terminologies, such as rebirth, okay? Because they're still pushing the reincarnation bit, which is about the self. So, earlier I was mentioning about Molya Pagguna. Molya Pagguna came from a Brahmin tradition, which is very much based on the Atman, or the self. So no matter what the Buddha was presenting, he was stuck. He had blindfolds on. He will not see beyond his illusion, his ignorance of, no, yeah, but there needs to be a self, right? Where's the self in all of this? So where's the self? They talk about war on drugs, in the 80s, in 90s. Meanwhile, the government, the U.S. government, was the biggest promoters of drugs. They were bringing in drugs left and right. Bill Clinton, he was the governor of Arkansas, and his brother, all these people. Just one example. It's all, by the way, public knowledge. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are all facts. The U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, all around the world. What war on drugs? Okay? You're the one who's doing it to this day. But you use a fancy word and then you go ahead on a wild goose chase hunt. And that's what they're doing. Well, where is the evidence? That's why we're stuck. That's why we still have to use airplanes to go from one place to the next. Which is quite stupid, but you control the population. You control. We are held back. We are held back. In my lifetime, there were individuals in the 70s, I remember. They were on the news in the 80s as well. Scientists in different parts of the world, individuals working in their garages, were able to create machinery, vehicles that could run on water, just regular water, air, imagine that. And all of a sudden, that person disappears, dies suddenly, or commits suicide suddenly. And then the research is gone, nobody finds it. Well, because there's no money being made, and especially there's no leverage. Then anybody could make that vehicle. So how can you maintain, how can you regulate, so-called? What the regulation means is it's a fancy word which is a proxy for control. How can you control the population? That is it. Otherwise, we don't need this. There's enough science that I have seen, and I'm a nobody when it comes to who is out there, what people are with so many more qualifications could speak to this. But they're shut down. Science journals are not going to publish their work. Even though there's evidence to it. Nikola Tesla, he was seen as a kook, but meanwhile we use most of the technologies today come from him. But history is written by idiots. History is written not just by dumb fools, idiots. No, sneaky idiots who have ulterior motives to keep people in Malunkya mode, in Molya Pagguna mode, to keep us in wrong views. Sakkaya Ditthi. That is at the crux of it. Similarly with the rebirth. Okay, the Buddha has talked about this so many times. But people come in and say, oh, where's the evidence? Okay, there was in the 70s, 80s, even parts of the 90s. Ian Stevenson, professor, a psychiatrist actually, who went all around the world. He went to Lebanon, he went to Sri Lanka, he went to India, he went to parts of Central America, South America, North America, Europe, Africa. He was finding people left and right. I think he, at that time, in his lifetime, I think there were 14,000 cases, or I think there's more. There's an institute, fortunately, that he established, where the evidence was so overwhelming, is so overwhelming. Science cannot disprove. There's some portion that you can, of course. There's always going to be some fake reports. Some people want to, make it bigger than it is to gain attention. That's natural. That's going to happen with people, unfortunately. But the overwhelming evidence, this was beyond, guessing. This was beyond just averages. This was off the charts. Statements, evidence, physical evidence that the mother and father, the neighbors, the relatives say that this child had these marks on the body when they were born, and they were stunned. Why would this child? And there was none on the bodies of the parents, of course, and mom, but this child is born with these scars, where no scars are supposed to be, unless they're injured, and they never were injured. And then the child grows up and is able to speak. And one of the first things they say is, for example, I was on the battlefield, I was doing this, and they're like, what battlefield? You're 4. What are you talking about? No. And they're fully convinced. And there's no TV, by the way. There's no internet, definitely, fortunately, in those times, where people could say, now, well, they must have seen it on some Instagram feed or something. No. They didn't even, in many cases, have electricity. But the child is describing rebirth. Okay? Now, even the science that is researching this is going to have to use, unfortunately, terminology that is false, that is wrong, that promotes wrong views, such as reincarnation, which comes from, when you think about in Brahmanism, in Vedic traditions, or Jainism and others, even Christianity, by the way, before they pulled it out, extricated it. It was accepted for several centuries, In Christianity, it's part and parcel of rebirth. But they never explained it properly because many, if not all of them, had wrong view about what is it that's being reborn. So it's much easier, it's more infantile, one would say. It's simplistic to say, well, the same person is being reborn again and again. So even when someone is looking at the evidence, that's evidence, that's conclusive evidence. By the way, who has the control over what is being printed? The media. That is what we're talking about. People don't understand this. When they refer to conclusive evidence, Bhante, can I have conclusive evidence of this? Can you show me where? They are not talking about conclusive evidence, the actual science. They're not talking about that. What they're talking about is this famous journalist, is this famous news agency, are these famous celebrity status so-called scientists, most of whom are just, celebrity types. They're not scientists at all. They're very backward, and they just have been pushed to that position of power to influence the minds of people. But they're not following the conclusive evidence. It's outdated what they're talking about, because they're reading the same thing that you're reading in the papers also. So they're promoting the peer-reviewed nonsense, the peer-reviewed lies, the pseudoscience. That's the pseudoscience. So when people talk about conclusive evidence, they are talking about what is being said on TV. What is the general mainstream media is saying about this? The mainstream journals, what are they saying? Because they are the real source of knowledge. This is where we just touched upon the stupidity of the questioner, the foolishness, the wrong view. Because there is a presumption that that is where the conclusive evidence lies. And no. Remember what Bhante Sariputta was saying. The attention is number one. Buddha had termed it yoniso manasikara, looking at the point of contact with wise reflective attention, placing the attention where it needs to be. Now, if you go ahead and look somewhere else, when an event is taking place in front of you, and there's another person looking at the event with attention, and meanwhile you're looking at somewhere else, you're standing right next to them. And the individuals later on come, the cops or something, police comes, and somebody comes and asks you, did you see it? You were here, right? Yeah. You'll say, I swear I didn't see it. Nobody's asking, where was your attention? We presume that simply for the fact that you're here, that should end the story. And you were awake, right? No, that's not enough. So when we're asking, this is also in connection to the question itself. One has to understand that they have a responsibility in asking the question. So the responsibility is, am I coming from a real, genuine place of seeking understanding? Or am I seeking to somehow debunk or somehow try to argue my point, to somehow validate my beliefs? Usually this is all where people come from. 99% of the time when questions are asked, especially if you have some books that you've read on the topic. In many cases that's not even the case. They haven't even read. They've heard somebody's assumptions about somebody else's presumption after they read something about the thing. So it's quite ridiculous. So when you have that, then you're completely blindfolded. You are completely blindfolded by things that have nothing to do with the thing that you're discussing or trying to presume that you're looking for honestly. So the question has to be asked through honest attention. After the person has probed, this is key. This is your conclusive evidence. This is your storehouse of convincing evidence, conclusive evidence. Because even empirical science, so-called empirical science, relies on the five senses. Ignores the sixth one. In Buddhism we have the sixth sense, right? That's not the psychic abilities necessarily. Sixth one is the mind. And specifically attention. Because a scientist that is following step-by-step procedures, doing the equations in a laboratory, doing this and that, will get the wrong result. That wrong in the sense that they follow the steps, but they're getting a different outcome. So they use, first of all, more than 70, 80%, if not 90, is being out of the senses. Within the sciences, they're using the eyes, plainly stated. empirical, that's what it means. And then they use the other senses, such as the sound. That's how, Pavlov saw that the dog was drooling. Why? Because he was looking at the dog. So he used his eyes. That's why it's getting more and more, or less and less reliable, the data that comes in through the senses, thanks to deep fake and other programs that are out there. AI is manipulating imagery. And because people now are not looking at real life, the tree, this, that, they're looking at screens, most of the things that we are seeing are not even real. AI is generating it. You don't have to have resources, incredible resources like government to do that. No, anybody can do it. So what does that say about empirical evidence that is collected? Even heads of state today are getting videos of themselves doing or saying things that they didn't. That is surprising to some, but it's also scary, because scary for those people who rely so much on the empirical rather than the experiential. There was a professor, a brilliant man, who died some years ago. I've known him, Professor David Kalupahana, and he was the department chair at the University of Hawaii on Buddhism, and he's written wonderful books on Buddhist philosophy and ways of knowledge. So I encourage individuals to read that book. And it's written for not just, the academician or scholar types, but for people to want to know what is a reliable source of knowledge. We seem to take it, it's like at face value, or it's a given. No, you have to understand what the Buddha accepted. Unfortunately, when the Dhamma is being presented these days, they always go after the fluffy stuff. What captures people's emotions, their imaginations. That's really doing a major disservice to the Dhamma and to the promotion of wisdom and understanding about it. So, when the Buddha, especially in the longer discourses in the Digha Nikaya, he talks about this extensively. Not just in that Nikaya, but in the other ones, Majjhima Nikaya, etc., and Anguttara, where he's talking about experiences. One of the famous ones is the Kalama Sutta, right? That we find in the numerical discourses, where intelligent, this is India, okay, at the time, 2,600 years ago, the the population of the Kalamas, they're called the Kalamas, they approached the Buddha and they said, "We heard so many great things about you, but we're confused about something." And he says, "What?" They say, "Bhante, we have many people come down from the Himalayas. They pass by our town, our city, and they are always trying to get students. They're trying to promote their teachings. And we're very respectful. We'll listen, this and that. Some of us have really accepted this, and then their teaching. And then after some time, another group or teachers, sages, rishis come down, and they tell us other philosophies, and now we're confused." So this has been going on for such a long time. So what should we believe? And the Buddha, you don't see this anywhere. I've never come across anything like this from any founder of religion, where the Buddha says, "I understand your confusion. It's valid." And then they feel good that we are being seen. Like in therapy, when a patient describes to you what they're going through, or you observe, you have to, if you're a conscientious, empathetic individual and skilled clinician, you will take that, and to deepen the connection, you have to let the patient know that you see them. That shows your humanity. among other qualities. So these individuals suddenly become like, wow, tell us more. And he says, the Buddha, to the Kalamas, he says, it shouldn't be because of tradition, because it's your religion, because the teacher is very charismatic or speaks well or has many followers. Or you've seen some, even like heard that they have some performing, right? Tricks and things like that. Today you have entire religions that are based on what are basically tricks that we call miracles. You take away the miracle, so-called miracle, the whole religion collapses. The whole religion collapses. That's not the Dhamma the Buddha taught. That's what he was trying to say to Molya Pagguna and Malunkyaputta. He says, you're burning with fire, you're burning with dukkha. That's your conclusive evidence, mister. You're in pain, that's why you came to me. You had dukkha, you still have dukkha. Dukkha is burning you alive, and you're still advocating your stupidity by asking me these stupid questions. Ask the right question. Bhante, how can I stop this pain? What pain? What is the pain? The same pain that drags you from life to life. The basis of rebirth. That's your conclusive evidence. What? Tanha. Craving and its a constant thirst for more. That is your conclusive evidence. And the fact that you don't need to read any scientific journal about this to prove it to you, that you are in pain, that you have discontent, that when someone beloved to you dies, you suffer. When you don't get what you want, you suffer. When you get something that you don't want, you suffer. You look at yourself right now, you're in top shape. Tomorrow, something happens. You lose your legs. Your beautiful relationship with this person that you've worked so hard is gone. The scores you wanted at your, exam, you don't get. You failed. You don't get the job. What is that doing to you? Everything going perfectly in your life, for example, and you have always envisioned that you're going to have the best partner, the best wife, the best husband, the best children. None of it is coming true. You have kids that are doing drugs. Your own child. Imagine that. No parent is going to see that and not feel pain. That is dukkha. That is your conclusive evidence. Not the Cartesian thinking. You're not going to use a blackboard to say, well, let's sit down and talk about this. No. Malunkyaputta was saying, Bhante, let's sit down and talk about this. I need to see this. And he's like, you're wasting time, Malunkyaputta. The arrow is deep in your foot. You're dying. The poison is spreading. The doctor is saying, I need to remove it. And you're saying, no, I need to know the name of the person. I need to know which family he's coming from. I need to know what type of arrow, what type of poison, what type of bowstring he used. And the Buddha asks Malunkyaputta, what do you think is going to happen? Is he going to get his answers and then allow the arrow to be pulled out by the physician? And Malunkyaputta himself says, no, Bhante. Long before he even gets a single answer to any of his questions, he would be long dead and gone. Because the poison would have already spread. He says, that's what you're doing though, Malunkyaputta. Malunkyaputta is smart enough to understand, and he gets up and bows down and he says, I'm sorry, Bhante, and he goes back to his work. And I'm glad to say, after several decades, he was a very slow learner. Because in a different sutta, in the Anguttara Nikaya, you have him come in as an old man. So many generations of bhikkhus had come and gone, younger, and had become arahants, but he was still staunchly attached to his wrong views. And the Buddha taunts him to kind of jolt him to reality. And he's in tears and he says, Bhante, in front of all these young bhikkhus, I'm old, I'm dying. Could you give me short, brief instructions so that I can go ahead and do the job and get myself off the suffering? Free myself through Nibbana, the experience. That's the extinction, which is terrifying for people. That's why they don't like it. Pottapada, which is another great sutta for anyone who's interested in this whole wrong thinking and how to remove the dart, the poisonous dart of ignorance, of self, of Atman, which runs in every person, no matter the religion that we claim to be, practicing. It's all based on Sakkaya Ditthi. That's the arrow that has to be pulled out. So that's what the Buddha says also to the Kalamas. He says, you don't have to follow somebody because of all those other things. He says, the teaching you have to apply to see if it's valid or not. That is conclusive evidence. You don't look outside of yourself for evidence. That's the problem. People are looking outside of themselves if it makes sense by the people that I respect. What's wrong with you? See now what I mean by also ignorance and conceit? In the Dhamma we have three kinds of conceit. One conceit is the one that has to do with servility. Always looking at people above you and saying, wow, I am so small. The other conceit is the opposite of that. You look down at people, laugh at them, scoff at them, contemptuous of them as being beneath you. And then there's the third kind, which is always comparing constantly. Oh yeah, I think we are on an equal level. All these states create agitation, just like the agitation that is created in an individual who's always seeking answers simply for the sake of satisfying their intellect. Intellect means not understanding. Intellect is not wisdom. This is what these individuals have to understand in asking questions. And really understand the reason why there is parinyaya. In Buddhism we have parinyaya. It's a complete understanding, comprehension. It is done individually, directly. No book can give you that. No lecture, no TED Talk could give you that. No Dhamma Talk could give you that. Unless you are ready in the form of attention, placing the attention where it needs to be. Now, there's a lot more could be said about this, but I encourage individuals to listen to other talks pertaining to that, such as rebirth, reincarnation. There's a talk I had given a few years ago in answer to this whole, Dalai Lama thing, but constantly, popping up, in Tibetan Buddhism of coming back again and again, and they're all supposedly enlightened to begin with. Out of their compassion, they keep coming back. That's complete bogus thing. Has nothing to do with the Dhamma. It's completely based on Adhamma. So you can't package it as Buddhist. It doesn't work. Okay? It doesn't work. It's like it doesn't work. The image that I get is such a grotesque image. Having an alligator and then you put a lipstick on it, okay, to make it more presentable. It's an alligator, it's a crocodile that's going to eat you. It's ignorance, this whole concept of reincarnation, because it's confirming or affirming to the individual that you, don't worry, you're coming back. In fact, they're promoting it by the teacher coming back. No, the Arahant, once they go lights out, that is it. They are gone if they're awakened, truly. And if they're not awakened, why are we even listening to these characters? Why? So I've given an extensive talk on there is no reincarnation in Buddhism. Individuals could listen to that, and the suttas, obviously. There's plenty of resources on the suttas, and of course I'm always amazed at the depth of understanding of the late Venerable Bhante Katukurunde Nyanananda of Sri Lanka. He was amazing, incredible, and I encourage individuals who really are interested in finding out to listen to, he is what a great gift that was. He wrote, he gave the sermons originally in Sinhala, in Sri Lankan language, to groups of monks, meditating monks. And later on, he translated those into English himself. And then he recorded himself narrating the whole thing in beautiful English. And before that, in his 20s, as his dissertation or thesis, he did Concept and Reality. Anybody who is thinking about approaching it from a purely Western point of perspective of scholasticism and things like that, to understand the Dhamma, I highly encourage you, if you can handle it, read Concept and Reality. Beautiful book on that challenges every single premise of Cartesian thinking and destroys it eloquently, beautifully, logically, rationally, with evidence. Okay? And obviously unfortunately he wasn't able to narrate his second, which he did 20 years later after the Nibbana sermons. That's what I was referring to, the lectures that he did in Sinhala and then in English. The Nibbana sermons that he did later on came to be called, as the book, Mind Released. I think that's what it was called. Nibbana, Mind Released, something like that. And then I remember it as the Nibbana sermons, that's why. But then 20 years later, he did other lectures, 20 of them, specifically on dependent arising, law of dependent arising, Paticca Samuppada, beautiful work, which unfortunately he was unable to narrate because his health was failing, but we're so grateful that he was able to accomplish writing it, translating it. So I took it upon myself to narrate the whole thing, which I did a few years ago. I finished. But I also have other works of his. So I highly, highly encourage individuals to look at what he has to say, including the interim stages or purgatory, the ideas that people still entertain in their minds. The problem is many people bring in junk from their own backyard into the Dhamma and try to squeeze it, try to find legitimacy of those ideas and beliefs, based on beliefs, wrong view, within the words of the Buddha. That's never going to happen. This is what I also meant by conceit on part of questioners. There needs to be humility when you're jumping out of the plane with a parachute on. You have to do your due diligence and put a healthy, functioning, reliable parachute on. But once it's there, you have to jump out of your conditioned way of thinking and take risks. Science happens on the fringes. That's true science. Okay? Whoever's able to match that level of commitment, let them join you and become your peers in that arena. You don't drop down, you don't stoop down to the level of mediocrity that is called the garden of peer-reviewed junk. Unfortunately, because not everyone has the same standard of perfection or of excellence of scientific research to really make it robust, to really make it rigorous. So eventually what's happening is the dumbing down. The same thing has been happening in the dumbing down of the Dhamma for centuries. Remember those two characters, the Malunkya and Molya Pagguna, these were actual students. They were looking at the Buddha when they were asking these questions. They were alive. They were his students. They were full of ignorance at his time. So we don't have to go looking thousands of years later and see, oh, this is when it became corrupt. No. It was already getting corrupt, and that's why the Buddha kept on constantly correcting these individuals. Fortunately, those conversations have been recorded and we have them. As far as the Deva is concerned, the same principle applies here. No one can tell you. You can never know how it really, on a mediocre, mundane, banal level, how how a beetroot that's cooked well tastes, how fresh bread tastes, how pizza tastes. If it's done right, with the right mozzarella cheese and tomato sauce, all that, it's right, correctly done. You watch it on YouTube, you try to make it, this and that, but you never taste it. You never taste the real thing. But everybody today wants to become an expert without tasting the Dhamma. That's the problem. Information is never going to be wisdom. That's why there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. Okay? It's just a bundle of information that's downloaded into this, that is given also a bunch of algorithms that keeps spitting out whatever you are putting in. Even that. It's data, Ones and zeros, zeros and ones put in a certain order. And then they just let the machine run and let's see what these algorithms are going to produce. But there's never going to be any wisdom coming out, because even that is manipulatable. That's why you put in, whoever run the AI factories, you put a certain information in. They've tested this with COVID, with other things. You put the wrong information. Today, it's verified that AI is even lying. Well, where's the conclusive evidence then? If you can manipulate AI to say things that you want it to say, where does that leave the whole thing as evidence-based also? Even a machine can be taught how to lie. And even a machine is being taught how to kill a human, which was one of the firewalls that they had placed, said, no, artificial intelligence, robots will never, we are putting that into the system. There's rules that no robot could ever be allowed to kill a human. Yeah? What is a drone doing? For the last 5 years, 6 years, it's been drone war everywhere. People have been dying because of artificial intelligence. Joysticks, people sitting there in one part of the world killing others. Again, I don't want to go on a tangent, too far of a tangent, but same thing with our own expectations and based on wrong view that bring about wrong information. And that wrong information can never substitute wisdom. So practice is key, as Lord Buddha said to the Kalamas. That's why he taught two things. The Buddha taught two things. Those are the two things that you need. One, understand, identify, find out, understand and appreciate the role of dukkha in your life. For that to take place, you have to be mindful of its presence in your life and stop telling yourself lies. Stop substituting one thing for another to make it believe yourself, to believe that you are better off today because you have this knowledge. It means nothing. You have to look at the evidence. Here's what I meant by dukkha is your ultimate convincing piece of information. Are you feeling dukkha? Yes or no? If you're not, then you're lying to yourself. Let me just tell you that. To see dukkha is half the solution. Just like to see the problem is half the solution, right? See dukkha. You cannot do that without being honest, without mindfully looking at it attentively, seeing it for what it is. Yatha bhutang pajanati. Once you do that, the Buddha taught the second, the cure, the antidote to that venomous arrow. That is the Noble Eightfold Path. You have to have right view in everything. You have to strive to have right view. For that, you need to be humble. You need to really, really look for the answers, for the right reasons, not to prove a point. You don't ask questions to prove a point. If you do, then you're already coming from a place of conceit. That's why most questions are not deserving of answers. But I wanted to delve into this because it's necessary. It's only fair. What people do with this, it's their choice. Second of the Noble Eightfold Path is right intention. Okay, I touched upon it right intentional thoughts, samma sankappa. Next comes right speech. It has to be correct. It has to come from the right place. And remember, right view is playing in all of these a big role. Next comes right action. Right action. What are your activities doing? They have to be intentional. They have to be based on right view and everything else that came before it itself, the right action. Next comes right livelihood. Next, right effort. Your effort has to match your goal, your intentions, your speech. Right effort has to play through and through until its completion, whatever it is that you're after. Next comes right mindfulness. Right mindfulness means allowing yourself the capacity to handle whatever's in front of you, watching the mind with the mind, not believing the lies your conditioning keeps telling you, being unafraid, not relying on fear that you camouflage as certitude. It's other people's statements. That's what he was saying. Lord Buddha was saying to the Kalamas. Right mindfulness. There is a right mindfulness and there are many wrong mindfulnesses. That's another talk I have given several months ago. There's only one right mindfulness, I say. It's not from me, it's from the Buddha. Satipatthana. It's all about that. And then finally you have Samma Samadhi, the right concentration, which right mindfulness inevitably takes you to. Okay? So, in a nutshell, there's the disease and there's the cure. To go about it, there is the three training to establish yourself upon. Right view leads all of them. Sila is number one training, which is working from a place of purity, moral, ethical, virtue-based behavior. Next comes your mental cultivation, which we call samadhi, meditation, and they culminate in right understanding, which is complete panya, wisdom. That's the third training. These three are the three prongs upon which the Dhamma rests, not what this Bhante is saying, what that Bhante has said, what that book is saying, what this evidence that this group of scientists are collecting is saying. No. They are personally to be verified by the individual. That's what Lord Buddha was saying to the Kalamas. He says, Ehi passiko. Come and see for yourself. Not read about it. Not make conclusions without having tasted it. So I'll stop here. Sukhi Hota.